So let's make a start, and I'd like to welcome you here today, but also to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that we're all meeting on today and pay my respects to elders past, present and futures, and acknowledge that these lands have always been places of learning, teaching and research. So welcome today from wherever you're coming from, and it's just fantastic to have you all with us. Tea and Buns has been going a couple of years now. We like to talk with each other and with people who are involved in leadership and the sector and helping us grow individually, but also professionally and as organisations as well. So today is all about the experience of leadership through a pandemic and developing culture in a very interesting sector, which is aged care. But of course, we can learn a lot from Sharon this morning, who is joining us. I'm just going to work out how to change my slides. There you go. So we are going to record today. We are recording today because there were some people who weren't able to make it and would love to watch the recording. So that's why we're just recording today. So just be aware of that. We really want you to feel able to unmute yourself and ask Sharon questions or talk about the issues that was going on for you. So unmute whenever you want to, but then when you're not talking, just mute again so that we don't have interference. But also you can use the chat box. So if you don't want to unmute, feel free to use the chat box and we'll do a little bit of talking on there. I'm going to try and keep an eye on the chat box for any questions that are coming through. So if I see anything, I'll try and stop and ask Sharon your questions that way as well. So yeah, very welcome to everybody here today. And we really want you to feel that this is a conversation around a table. Tea and Buns is a community of practice that really enables us to be challenging with each other, but also really honest and respectful to each other and support each other as leaders and professionals working in the sector. So welcome. All right. So I thought that we would kick off today with something, a little icebreaker, really. Sharon and I were talking, and just a couple of months ago now, when I was getting to know Sharon, and we were talking about what she's been doing in her organisation, and we were talking about leadership approaches, and we were talking about the ways that we build culture within organisations. And I really wanted to remind you, if you've heard of Appreciative Inquiry before, but introduce you to Appreciative Inquiry if you've never heard of this. Appreciative Inquiry is a great framework that many leaders are using to actually influence their culture and measure their culture as well in many different ways. So it's a very versatile framework. And the difference between the traditional approach that we often use as leaders, which can be very much about a problem-solving approach. So what's the problem? Why is this problem occurring? How can we solve this problem? Which we like to jump to very, very quickly, I would say. And we kind of like to find, quick, let's take some action and work out how we solve this problem. And if it's a cultural problem, that's huge. That's really a really tough way to do things, because we can be really embedded with the challenge of these problems that are going on within our culture. But Appreciative Inquiry kind of takes a different perspective, a more of a strength-based perspective. And it really starts with appreciation and empathy, really talking about what is, how can we acknowledge the challenges? So we're not dismissing there are challenges, but how can we acknowledge what those challenges are and understand them from a strength-based perspective? So what might be, what if, I'm using those words a lot at the moment, what if, or how might we? So using those and changing the narrative that we have within our teams to be able to be more solutions focused, but in a strength-based manner. And then determining what should be, what do we want to be telling people about our own stories and about our culture and about our organisations and the impact that we make. And then we can create that and look for solutions and pathways to creating that. So really then appreciative inquiry takes the approach that people and organisations are a solution or a mystery to be embraced and you know, a challenge. And in fact, it was Edgar Schein who said that culture, if you want to boil culture down, it's the way that we solve problems. How do we solve problems? That will define your culture. So I thought that we'd just do something today very quickly to kick us off. I'd like you to think, and you do not need to share names, I'd like you all to think of someone who you typically don't give feedback to, a colleague. I want you to think of someone who's the first person that comes to your mind that you don't normally give feedback to, or positive feedback. You haven't given them feedback for a long time. You're kind of busy doing, you work with them, but you haven't really taken time to give them positive feedback. Write down the first name that comes to your mind and tell me when you've done that. And then I'm going to give you a challenge. I don't want to know names. That's for you. All right. I just want you to write that down. Just tell me when you've done that. And then I'm going to give you a little challenge. So who's the first person that you think, I haven't really given them positive feedback for a while, or I haven't done it? Give me a thumbs up or a little emoji. Have you got a name in mind? Heather, Melinda, Leanne? Yes? Okay. All right. So you've got that person in mind, and now I'm going to give you a sentence starter. And I call these Kudos Starters, okay? And I'm going to flick the screen and I want you to fill in the sentence for this person that you're thinking of, all right? So use any one of these. You can pick any one. So it might be something like, I'm amazed by you played a crucial role by. I wanted to let you know that having you on our team is, you know, I appreciate your unique perspective is a tremendous asset to our team because, or things have definitely been crazy lately, but you're, okay, have a go and see if you can fill in one of those sentence starters for that person that you were thinking of. If you want to share that, not without names, but if you want to share the sentence, I would love to see what you've just come up with. Have you been able to just think, how would I give this person positive feedback or appreciating what is? This is what we're doing. We're just appreciating what is. I want to see yours, Leanne. If you want to put it in the chat, just share with us what you just came up with. And while you do that, oh, good, Heather. Things have definitely been crazy lately, but you're always a rock for our team and inspire. That's awesome, Heather. That's really lovely. I'm inspired by your enthusiasm and dedication to the field. Love it, Leanne. Melinda says, I appreciate your positive attitude in anything you take on. Wow, that's awesome. Now, sometimes we just have to sit and reflect and create these kind of kudos statements or appreciating what is. And the reason is that research actually has found that you can improve morale and satisfaction within your team simply by appreciating what is and sharing that with your team members. Even if they're not your best buddy, all right? Or even if you don't work with them very often, you might see them once in a blue moon, but you can still show some appreciation about what is. And the research has shown that if it's a manager doing that to you, about 55% of people will improve their level of morale and satisfaction, they found in this study, when the manager actually gives them some appreciation of what is. But then they tested it colleague to colleague, and they found that actually 70% of people actually improve their morale and job satisfaction when a colleague appreciates them for what is. So, wow, isn't that amazing that you can make a massive difference to people's attitudes, to their perspectives, to their ability to engage with you as a colleague if you appreciate what is. And of course, we are talking about genuine feedback, and we don't want you to just kind of make this up and go around sort of, not being real with this. We need you to be very genuine with it. But it just shows you how you can change culture when you start using appreciative inquiry, because if people are appreciating what is, then they're more likely to then talk with you about challenges and come to co-design solutions of how to create solutions. That's great. So thanks for sharing that. Tash shared, I appreciate you always checking in on the team and your genuine care for our well-being. Wow. Okay. I love that. Thank you so much. And Matilda, yes, I'm happy to share these slides with you. So thanks very much. And that was just the icebreaker to get you thinking about what we want to talk about today with Sharon, which is really, how do we create a culture that is really looking for ways of designing solutions to our challenges, but in a very strength-based and a way that builds our culture, doesn't destroy it, especially during difficult, challenging times such as a pandemic. So let me introduce you to Sharon. Sharon, welcome. You're joining us from the Sunshine Coast today and from an aged care organisation called Ballycara. I want to hear about that. But Sharon, just introduce yourself, please, to us. Tell us a little bit about your story, because I know that you moved, we're going to hear your accent in a moment, you moved from England to Australia just before the pandemic to join an aged care organisation. So you must have felt like you were being, thrown into the fire here. But tell us your story. How did you get to be doing what you do now? And what was that journey looking like for you?
Okay, good morning, everyone. It's lovely to join you. I'm English, as Ruth has already referred to, and I landed here in Australia in March 2019. My career, by profession, I'm a general and mental health nurse. I'm no longer registered in the UK, but I've been involved professionally in health and social care for over 40 years, and particularly in aged care for over 30 years. And it was through that work internationally, I sat on some boards and spoke at conferences that I made the connection with the chairman here at Ballycara. And long story short, I got an opportunity. A role was created and I came out and spent some time with Ballycara and took the plunge, believed that age is not a limit to what we do, age is a number, and that all the talk I've been doing over the years about not being limited by your age, when I got this opportunity in my late 50s, I'm now in my next decade, but in my late 50s, I thought, I need to embrace this. I need to embrace this opportunity. I talk about being the change you want to see. So I'm a person who likes to walk the talk. So have come over here as I'm now executive director, but very much a strategic convener, working alongside an organisation that's been really well established for a long time. We are an aged care organisation, but we're not limited by that. We have a retirement community here in Scarborough on the Redcliffe Peninsula just outside Brisbane. We also, our focus is on wellness, irrespective where our services are. So we have a retirement village, we have an aged care facility where we provide nursing, we have home care, and we also have health and wellness. So we work across Southeast Southeast Queensland, and also in Melbourne, Victoria. So we've got a range of services, but Scarborough is our main site in terms of the village and the nursing care, but our intent is that as we go forward, we will grow our community hubs, our home care and our wellness to people. And we will lead by wellness in all that we do. So my journey, incoming, I came to review the former strategy, which expired in 2020, to work with the exec and management team and the staff here at Ballycara to put a new organisational structure in place, to work with all of our people, including people who use services, to bring about a new strategic direction for the next 5 years. So we implemented that this year. And yes, the pandemic came, and but in spite of the pandemic, which has created significant, I'm sure everybody will appreciate wherever you're working, the personal impact as well as your professional impact wherever you're working is immense and takes its toll in various ways. But we wasn't going to let that hinder the changes we needed to make, because, you know, we have a responsibility to the people we serve, but also to each other, and to contribute to our sector going forward. So yes, we've managed the pandemic, and it's at times been challenging, and being in Queensland, we've still got borders that are closed, and no time soon when they're going to open. There'll be a press release at conference at 10, I'm sure, this morning.
Sharon, I want to just ask you a question about arriving in a new organisation, which is, you know, often the best time to actually assess culture and understand what's going on within the organisation. So when you arrived at Ballycara, what were you doing to kind of assess, you know, how people were feeling, what was going on in the organisation, the culture? What do you do as someone who understands, you know, what the importance of culture? Can you give us some tips on, or some thoughts on what you were looking out for or what you were assessing?
Yes, certainly. I mean, I'd read Ballycara uses, and it's our trademark as well, it's our SONA ethos. SONA is Gaelic for happiness. And we've done some research with QUT many years ago for our residents in aged care, but we've taken that ethos and it has been expanded. So what was I looking for? What did I feel? The very first time I actually came to Ballycara in 2018, something was palpable on site. When I engaged with the people, it resonated with my heart. Now that might sound really fluffy, but there was something that really resonated at a deep level. I'm a people person, but there was something that I felt when I engaged with people. What I observed and noticed was people were present in the moment. They made eye contact. For somebody who's good with faces, but not always brilliant with names, they put me to shame, because they always remember people's names. So I really had to up my game in really learning people's names. But then what I did is I went back to the floor, and I didn't take any agenda other than building relationships. But when I did that, it gives me that grassroots ability to see, to feel, to touch. So I spent time with clients in many settings. I spent days with our exercise physiologists, got in the pool with our clients, experience being a recipient of them doing a class. I ironed, I cooked, made sure I was up to speed in everything. I cared. I didn't go and do any nursing. I'm not registered over here, but I did go and do some care duties. The only thing I didn't do, I did spend time with our maintenance people, but I wasn't let loose with a hammer or a chisel or anything. But that really enabled me to hear and observe and see. And I took that learning and was able to make an assessment. And then I looked at our policies and our procedures. I saw where there were gaps. I saw at that time, even though relationally people were good, we had some ways of working weren't enhancing. We weren't getting optimum performance as an organisation in terms of how our people were coming together, how we were sharing ideas, when ideas were introduced, how they were embedded. People also, whilst you've got a good culture, as part of a good culture, that doesn't mean ignoring poor performance or not dealing with issues that need to be managed appropriately. But the way that you do that is really important. And you can either have, and it's really interesting, your illustration of the root cause analysis or appreciative inquiry methodology, because root cause analysis, because of its fastidious going into the minutiae of detail, and that why, can actually lead to a blame culture. And you don't always get a learning, because that why takes you down a route that says, well, who's responsible for this?
Yeah.
Whereas when you've got an appreciative inquiry, You, you ask more searching questions that are enabling and empowering. And I'm a very practical leader and manager, and I have a little rule for myself. I don't point the finger before looking at the three that are pointing back at myself. And I ask, have I done everything to help that individual or that team or that service to be the best it can be? Are they equipped with knowledge and resources? And that doesn't mean that resources are limitless. We all work in boundaries and financial constraints, policies, legislation, procedures, competing at times. But asking those questions, because sometimes people don't know what they don't know. And we've got to give them the opportunity. And in that relationship and having those impact on people's lives that we work with and those that we serve, we have to make sure that we're fulfilling our part of the proposition and coming to the table to enabling people. That doesn't mean that people aren't enabled to improve, positively improve. And in my time here, I can't think of people that we've had to deliberately or intentionally say goodbye to, because you can turn situations around, but we wouldn't be afraid of doing that if the need arose. But we'd go through, obviously, a process, and not just a HR process, a really meaningful process that would help to, so we could learn together. We've got some strategic commitments internally, and we talk about trust and transparency. And these aren't our values are different, but trust and transparency, we talk about having a learning culture. That doesn't mean people aren't accountable or responsible, because that's important. But we do seek to learn from each other and to always find a way of how we could have done things differently and better, so that we take that forward next time.
Yeah, Sharon, I'm so interested about this approach because, it is very traditional to kind of look at problems, try and understand blame, especially in an aged care environment, which is, very tricky, although we're all working in organisations where there's complex problems and challenges that we need to address. But when I looked up what your strategic priorities were as an organisation, I was very interested to see it's people, presence and partnership. Now, those are not typical strategic goals for an aged care provider. So how have you distilled what you're trying to do to those three things, which is people, presence and partnership? Because I think we could all, learn from those strategic priorities. How did you come to that then, after having, your time spent with people and consulting and having empathy with people in a human-centered way? How did you come to those strategic priorities?
I think we went on a journey over a 6 to 8 month period, and it started with our board and executive, but we did loads of focus groups with our people who use our services, all levels of staff. I can't say that we reached all of our people who use our services, and not all staff chose to engage, but we got a really good consensus. And the things that we consistently heard was that people wanted what we did to be accessible. They wanted the language to be accessible and to be able to talk about what we did, and they wanted it to resonate with them. And the other clear message that I received was, why is there a difference? Why do sometimes you produce stuff for us as people who use services and our families, but then there's something different for staff? Aren't we all people? And so that was a really grounding perspective. We had a strapline at Ballycarrow that we've used for some time, which was inspiring healthy and happy living. And when there was a rebrand some years ago, that was our strapline. I'm not one for always following convention. And I really do like things to be accessible. And in the UK, we've worked for many years, they haven't arrived, but the engagement and co-production and co-design, particularly in aged care, and that involvement of people who use services and really giving them voice, choice and control has really guided how I've operated over many years now. And so we elevated our strapline to become our why. And we've ditched the term mission or vision because people couldn't talk about them. But when we started talking about why do you come to work, people said, well, I come because I want to inspire healthy and happy living. Okay. So we had a conversation about how do you want to do that? And we recognize that everything we do is human, people. And so we have an impact through our relationships. So that became our how. And then we wanted the themes that we said that, well, okay, if we have impact through relationships, how do we do that? And the people is that people are at the heart of all that we do through meaningful, inclusive relationships. That for us just became really central in terms of our staff, our partners, our contractors, whoever we touch lives with, rub shoulders with. We wanted people to be central. Our presence was about, we want to reach and influence. And we don't want to just do that one-on-one, up local and personal. We don't want to just do it in our services. We want to do that regionally, in our communities, in our regions. Our chairman and I do stuff internationally. We want our voice to be heard, to influence and make a positive difference. So using our knowledge and our relational approach, we positively lead, influence and inspire. That's what we're aiming to do. And then we recognise that we're an organisation that currently employs about 330 people, and we're growing by the day because particularly our home care is growing. And we know that we can't do everything by ourselves, and that actually by partnering with people or other organisations, the outcome is much greater. So our partnership is about together we enable better lives through purposeful connections and collaborations. And it's that recognition that we don't have all the answers, and that sometimes you do need to come together to create something different, new and more meaningful. So that's how we came with that. And then we've got some strategic ambitions, and then we also renewed our values, which we call our SONA values. And
so before we go into your SONA values, I just really want to pick up on the fact that you said a great, question that we could all be asking each other, especially as leaders. We could be asking people, and I've written it down, why do you come to work? How awesome is that as a conversational starter to really think about, what is the purpose? What is the, defining purpose about what gives me fulfillment and what encourages me to give my best when I'm at work? And then really using that to help frame what is this purpose, which everybody, as you say, from the maintenance crew to your nursing staff to your executive and your board, everybody can then articulate what is the purpose of the organisation. I think that's a really great thing for us to be talking to each other about, and not just seeing it as the mission statement of the organisation, that we don't really know how we're connected or how we're contributing to that mission statement. It can be a little bit lofty for us sometimes, or it's very organisational centric, not very human centric. But I love what you came up with there. Sharon, I do want to hear about SONA, but I'm going to actually just flick the slide to something that you told me the other day, which was, in terms of your leadership approach, you said to me that you love the idea that you need to be the change that you want to see. So you've talked to us a lot about how you've gone out and spoken to people and really immersed yourself in the culture and to understand it, but also then to influence it. Can you tell me then about the values that you came up with and how you instill those values, not by just preaching about it, but by how you live it as an executive, but also as a colleague and someone who is really responsible for, many staff and their workplace practices. How do you do that as a leader?
I think for me, this phrase has, people in the UK know that this is sort of like my mantra, that I really believe that wherever we are, whatever our role, whatever our level of responsibility and accountability, whether it's in our families, in our communities, in our workplace, we can be the change we want to see. And whether you have the title leader or not, or manager or not, we all exert some influence over another person or another circumstance every day. It may be visible, may be seen, heard, or unseen or unheard in terms of by the masses as such. But I think we can all be that change that we want to see. And I think it doesn't have to be massive. So whether it's the language we use, whether it's our posture, whether we call out, there's something, isn't it? The standard you walk by is the standard you accept. But I mean, but all those things matter in terms of if we want to be a change agent, whether you want to lead and inspire and develop other people to be the best version of themselves. So when we looked at our values, it wasn't just a case of, coming up with a list of words, which they so often are, and they appear on people's websites. And I'm not saying or suggesting that anybody's isn't authentic or that there isn't a good heart or intent behind them. But we wanted ours to come off the page. And when we did our road shows, and again, having listened to our staff, our values are 3. And our values are everyone matters, creativity, and integrity. But when we did our values, and this is my mental health background coming out probably, because we have a value, we also have a descriptor which describes that value. But then we've gone, if you wanted a table, two more columns in your table, we've also said, what's the behaviour that accompanies that? Now that list isn't exhaustive, but we've listed some behaviours. And then we said, okay, if I'm behaving that way, how will people that I connect with experience that? So we've really taken a very cognitive approach, I suppose, a very behavioural approach in some ways. But we've talked about value, descriptor, behaviour and experience. And whoever you are, wherever you are, people who use our services, our staff, these resonate with us all. So everyone matters. Each person and their well-being is important to us. That's our descriptor. And then what that might look like as a behaviour is we actively listen to what you have to say. And then the experience is, I feel heard. I feel I have a voice. Doesn't mean that the person always gets the outcome exactly as they want, but that we can track that. It's quantifiable as well as qualitative. It tells us a journey. It can be measured. We can be held to account. Whether we're accessible or not accessible. So those were really, really important to us in terms of when we took it out to the staff. And when I did the road shows during July and August this year, the most thrilling thing for me was staff saying, oh, I can identify. I can see that. I do that. I give people time. I do sit with people. I would always give somebody respect and honour them. And I do that by just sitting with them, holding their hand. That's what it looks like. That's my behaviour. I do intentionally make eye contact with people. So I think for me, it will be good in a year's time when we do, surveys, when we review what we're doing, how it's being embedded, how it's being lived. But the fact that the language was accessible, we have an experts by experience group, which is across our organisation. It's led by our creative and engagement therapist, who's an art therapist by her professional background. And she leads that group. It's not our only way of engaging with people who use our services, but we use them as a sounding board. I took the strategic document to them before its finalisation. They've been involved. It's wonderful because sometimes we see people by their condition or what's brought them to the service, but we know these people's history. And I've got some on our group. It just so happens that we've got some retired senior executives with many more years experience than me. And they said, no, you've done this bit. You need to add something here, Sharon, and you need to add something here. So I just soaked it up and I've incorporated it. So when people are reading our documents now, some of them, it won't appeal to all, but they, in the main, people say, yeah, I can resonate with this, I can connect, I can see myself reflected in this, I see my voice reflected in the words that I use.
Yeah, Sharon, that is so awesome. And I want to pick up on two things. Number one, I think anyone that has worked with me knows that when I talk about culture, it's what people think, say, feel and do. And bringing those together and having empathy for people and understanding that you can actually change behaviour by changing people's thoughts and the way that they act. Is brilliant. And the other thing that you can't see, but I can, is Leanne is actually jumping up and down, okay, because you're talking about Leanne's speciality here, which is empathy and how you drive people's behaviour by using empathy. Yes, and I can see Leanne going, yeah, because there's actually lots of evidence behind the power of instilling empathy throughout your culture and actually having that as a really good value, which is allowing people to feel heard and listened to. And yeah, so I mean, what you're talking about is really evidence-based in terms of building culture. And so I really love that. Now, please, people, put your questions in chat if you have any questions for Sharon, because I will continue asking my questions if you don't have any. But if you'd like to ask Sharon some questions, please do. Sharon, I want to ask you about this very inclusive, collaborative kind of approach that you've taken. But as you rightly said, it's not everyone's going to engage, and there will be a massive amount of perspectives from, you know, experienced people, but, you know, just people from different backgrounds, training, cultures, you know, et cetera, et cetera. How do you manage to get to a point where, as you said, in the main, most people are feeling connected with that? How do you bring those different perspectives together and make people feel that they have been heard in such a process?
I think it's communication. Communication, you need to be seen. I need to be seen. I need to be heard. People know that they can come. We have to be accessible as a senior and managerial team. And when you're introducing topics, I can please some people some of the time. I won't please everybody all of the time. I think it's also important that if people come with ideas or thoughts about wanting something to change, I think taking them through that process, understanding. Often people present with a problem or an issue, and it's including them and saying, well, what have you thought could be the solution? And it's that continual drip, if you like, at all levels of the organisation. It's very easy to go into solving mode, you know, as a mum, you know, and if there are other parents or you've got nieces, nephews, whoever, you know, just if you just think, and please don't think I'm likening our workforces and the people we work with to children, but there is a process, and sometimes it's easier to do than to be collaborative, but you have to constantly be intentional. In my work, sometimes I have to do, it's life-saving, you know, and so do some of my staff. If you don't act, it could be really disastrous. But for what we're talking about here today, about culture, finding solutions to the way we behave with each other and with the people we serve, that has to be collaborative, and you have to work at it. And yes, sometimes I sit in my office, I'm human, and I go, you know, why is somebody doing that? Okay, why haven't they? And then I have to sort of go through that process, and then I go and sit and I'll say, tell me about it. How have we got to here? And it's that appreciative, okay, so what are you thinking as a solution? What's the way out? Listen. So it's applying that. And there are times you don't want to, because it takes more energy and effort, but it's worth it. It is so worth it that it's worth working through.
Yeah, that's also the skill and the power of reflective practice. We actually teach our undergraduate students reflective practice for this very reason, because it is a very powerful leadership skill. And a lot of our undergrads and even some of our postgrads actually go, why have we got to do reflective practice? You know, how's that helping me? That's not a practical skill. Yet, you know, we know, and they do eventually realize how powerful that is as a tool to be able to just sit and reflect and be mindful and present, as you've said, and, you know, use that word, to be present in the what is and what if, which is why I use the words what if or how might we. So changing the narrative and allowing people to know that reflective practice is a really important part of the process. It can create really amazing solutions that you wouldn't necessarily think of if you rush to the first solution that you could come to. When you sit back and reflect, and I even use the word sometimes fall in love with the problem. Now, that doesn't mean you sit and wallow in it. It's around just understanding and having empathy for what's going on and why that challenge may be occurring. So, yeah, I love all that.
I'm afraid to be a mirror to people, because so often it's not that you're abdicating your responsibility as a leader, but some people, well, what are you going to do about it? You know, I need an answer, and you go, well, okay, well then what would you like me to do? What have you thought could happen? What could we do here? Is there something we can do together? You know, have you thought that through? Have you costed it? You know, it's all the other things that just bring in it, but just sometimes stopping, taking a breath and being a mirror and reflecting back, and that helps people. And, you know, it's great that you're teaching it, and if you haven't ever taught it, I'd say, you know, and if people haven't ever used it, just think of yourself, how can I be a mirror? How can I reflect back to people and say to them, oh, you know, yeah, I hear that, but what have you, you know, what would you like me to do? What have you thought about? What can we solve? How can we do this and work through this together? And I think that's really important.
I'll just tell everybody I've got a great handout. If anybody wants a handout about the different ways of doing reflective practice, just give me an email and I'll send you that handout that I put together for another event that I did once. And I just want to pick up on Leanne's point. She said, yeah, it's important to be vulnerable to not knowing all the answers. Because we can't, can we? I mean, even as leaders, we can't know all the answers all the time. And sometimes it's best not to know the answers, because that's when you're kind of more forced, I suppose, to listen to different perspectives and to actually be vulnerable to the fact that you might not have the best answer, or there might be collaborative answers, which are much better than you just going, I know, we'll do this, you know, or I've done this before, we'll just do this. So really, yeah, having the space, I suppose, for feedback, for listening to different perspectives, that's a very good place that we can be in as leaders.
I think something else that I'm just going to pick up, if I may, Ruth, on one of your earlier points, and when you did the icebreaker exercise and you got people looking at appreciative inquiry methodology and the way that we can work with staff to stop and praise and reflect and encourage and help them to be the best they can be. And it's a really good example of us as leaders not having all the answers. One of our staff, who she's recently retired, but some years ago, she used to conduct all our telephone interviews with the clients who use services, people who use services, and do our surveys. And she was the recipient of so many wonderful stories and, you know, people saying positive things, that she came up with the idea of having a form of hope. And we have a form of hope, and they're available to all our clients, they're available to all our staff, and they can be done at any time to anybody in the organisation. And it's a page whereby it's a form of hope because it's a thank you. And it's where one person says to another person, I want to thank you. They come in centrally, and what happens is they are then presented to the person, sometimes by the person who's written it, sometimes they don't want to do that, but they want it given on their behalf. And for example, in our maintenance, it accompanies, you get a little gift, and it's really not huge. So our maintenance guys may get their thank you, and they may get a Kit Kat, and have a break, have a Kit Kat, and it just makes them smile, and they receive that. Quarterly, all of those forms of hope are reviewed, and we have a reward and recognition scheme. Managers and exec are excluded when they are collated at that point, and we have a panel of people who use services, and we usually take a staff member that's not involved in frontline service and hasn't been nominated, and then we choose 4 people, and quarterly those 4 people are honoured across the organisation. They get a $250 gift card, and usually there's a write-up in our quarterly magazine that goes out to everybody, and they're just recognised for the difference they've made. Mm-hmm. And we've had catering staff, frontline care staff, reception staff, all manner of people across our organisation, and it all started because of the form of hope. So that attitude of gratitude, that putting into practice what we believe, it's really, some people go, oh yeah, they'll always get it. There's always the naysayers on the fringes, but that's not a reason to not do it. It's available to all. So when those naysayers say to us, oh, well, they would get it, we'll say, well, have you nominated? Would you like to nominate? Who would you like to thank? Have you done something that somebody may want to thank you for?
Yeah, so it's inspiring people to that standard of gratitude, as you say, and of appreciation, so that everybody is encouraged to do it. Because if you don't do it, then people don't do it, right? So if you don't have that system, and we know culture is definitely about our systems as well, if we don't have that system to intentionally influence our culture happens anyway, but it usually doesn't happen in a great way, which is the word that I use a lot with people is, what is your intentional culture? What is it that you're actually trying to achieve through your culture, and what are the systems and processes that are making that happen? So I love that form of hope. I
was a person, I wrote one, I try and do quite a few, but some months ago, in a period where we could hug each other, in one of these rare periods, one of the staff asked if I'd heard from my family. And I've got family back in the UK. And I said, yeah, we FaceTime and everything. And she just came round and she just said, you look like you could do with a hug. And she gave me a hug. And I just thought, and I did a thank you note afterwards. I said, it was a hug in time. Thank you for looking beyond my role in the organisation. Thank you for just being human. And it was really powerful. And it was lovely to be the recipient of what she did, but it was also nice to be able to reciprocate. And
yeah, that's gorgeous. Yeah. Sharon, we've just got a couple of minutes left. So what's some practical tips that you could give us all today if we're walking away from this feeling, yes, I want to be able to influence my culture better. I know that people are looking to be engaged, and, I want my team to work together, in better ways. What's a couple of things you could kind of say, look, go off and, think about this, or try this, or what's a couple of things you could leave us with?
Okay, I think one of them, it's a challenge, really, and it involves that reflective practice that we've spoken about. But I would ask each of you, and would you wish to be led by you?
Ooh, I'm going to write that one down.
Okay, and I think that's a really good place to start. And that doesn't mean you get all screwed up and introspective, I can't say the word, or that you're hard on yourself.
Yeah.
But I think it's a really good starting point, and it's one it is not a one-off question. So it's a question I'm currently asking myself, and that we've got a managers meeting coming up soon, and I will be using this as a frame to have a conversation, because I know that having put in all the organisational changes that I've done over the last couple of years with the team and everything, sometimes we're still making decisions as managers without, and exec and in other places where we don't think through all the stages, and so there's some unintended consequences. The intent is sound, but the actual the result is that all the pieces aren't aligned. And so I know sometimes I'm over too much detail, and I don't need to be, and I don't want to be. So we're going to have a conversation how they can manage me to get out of their hair. Because at the moment, I'm not sure at times that I'd want to be managed by me, because I know I'm scrutinising everything, and I don't want to be. And I don't need to be. I've got some really good people, excellent people. But, so, but I think it's a good question to ask ourselves.
And then, maybe use that appreciative inquiry framework to take ourselves through that question. So, yes, we all have strengths, so appreciate what is, but then say, well, where do I need to improve or develop myself or my skills or my knowledge, and how might I do that, and take that framework to reflect on ourselves. Yeah. Awesome.
The following of that is how that phrase that's on the screen, be the change you want to see. How do I do that? How do I live our values? How do I be a role model? What do I expect to see and feel and hear, and therefore what do I give in return? So what can people expect of me? And I think that's really important. I think if you go back and look at organisational values, how they are in your respective organisations, your culture, effectively, I know there's loads of research and there's many more eloquent people than me that will talk about the theories and everything, but practically I would say that it's your culture is how you live, walk, talk, breathe your values, and what are the behaviours that accompany them, and how people experience, because that will set the tone. And if they're just on your wall, dormant, to be looked at and recited, then perhaps that's the change that needs to happen.
In fact, I worked with another organisation that had a similar thing to your page of hope or your affirmations there, but they actually used their values to frame it. So they said, tell us when someone is actually demonstrating the values. And what it did is it made everybody sort of know their values very intimately, because they were always saying, oh, there's someone doing, the value 1, or there's someone doing value 2. But it allowed then the narrative to be all around values and how people were demonstrating values. So that was just another sort of play, I suppose, on that sort of affirmation and gratitude, but really using their values as a framework and a narrative around that.
And we do that through all our meetings. So one of the things that we do is all of our meetings across the organisation, the key ones, not just the 5-minute chats, but all the key meetings, we continually cycle out the aged care quality standards, irrespective of where you are in the organisation, but we accompany that by one of our values, and we talk about it in our meetings, so that when we come back to our key management and exec meetings, we have some positive stories of the differences that people have made. So we try and do that cycle. Doesn't always work perfectly. Some people do it better than others, but the intent and we're getting better at it. We're practicing.
Yeah, that's great. Fantastic. Now, Leanne has also suggested a great practical way that we can start building culture and doing what we're saying here is empathy training. Leanne has an organisation called Empathy First and teaches people. And as we've said, there's a lot of evidence behind the importance of using empathy when we're talking to people and working with people. So yeah, that's another great strategy. Look, we've come to the end of our time. Sharon, I have loved talking to you about culture. I always love talking to people about culture and learning how people are doing things in their own organisation. And I hope everyone today, you've taken some ideas away or you've been inspired what Sharon and the team at Ballycara are doing. You can go and check out the SONA values and everything. If you go onto the Ballycara website, there's a lot of information up there. And please connect with Sharon on LinkedIn and myself, obviously, and we'll start sharing more of this because our culture is so critical. It's critical for us in times of change, but just generally when we're going through tough times or when things are, pressure is on us, it's the culture that really supports us and encourages us and affirms us and keeps us being the best version of ourselves, as you said, Sharon. So really want to thank you for that, Sharon. And just before we sign off, I want to let you know that for the next so today was a Friday, and for the next 2 Tea and Buns, we're going to continue on a Friday. So next Tea and Buns is at the end of October, and I actually have another fantastic person to have a chat with called Ben Farr-Wharton. He's from the Edith Cowan University, and he's actually been doing some research about this. And he's going to be talking about rethinking the drivers of employee performance. So I really encourage you to share what Tea and Buns is all about with your colleagues. Bring your leaders, bring your staff, encourage them to come along and listen to what Ben has been researching and is going to be sharing with us about the drivers of employee performance. So in the meantime, though, thanks, Sharon, again. Thanks, everyone, for turning up today, and have a really awesome day, and go away and do some of these practical exercises and start appreciating people with your Kudos Starters. Okay, I'll share that on the blog when I put up the recording. All right, see you, everybody.